Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the VRCade Podcast, a podcast for arcades by arcades. I'm your host, Indie VR, and my co-host is Chun. How are you doing, Chun?
Hello, doing fine, thank you.
And today we have Nidal from Base Station VR in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming on. You have a podcast very similar to ours where you interview basically owners of arcades, and literally what we're doing to you at the moment, I thought we'd kind of switch it around and we'd ask you the questions.
Sure. Yeah. I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I just wanted to ask you, we were talking earlier and you said you're not much of a gamer. So I think that's very interesting to start there. So you own a VR arcade and you're not much of a gamer.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing to keep in mind is it is a business. I own a business. So this which just happens to be a VR arcade. And I didn't start it with this idea that, I'm going to have, a bunch of gamer friends or whatever come over and play. It was all about starting a business. And this just happened to be a very interesting and unique idea that I thought, I had this notion of if you build it, they will come, which was definitely the wrong idea. But that was the intent initially was, hey, if I put together a VR arcade, people are going to, run in and start doing VR. So that was how it started. I had intended on opening a different business before I got into the VR arcade idea. So what happened was I was working in 2016. I was working for in retail, but specifically in self-storage. And in the middle of the 2016, I thought to myself, hey, this would be good. I want to start a business rather. And the business that came to mind was a smoothie shop. So doing smoothies and things like that. And then I started formulating the idea mid-2016. Towards the end of the year, kind of in the September timeframe, the business that I was working for was being sold. And so that was the opportunity where I thought, now I can open up a business. So I transitioned to a different business at that point, while not my business, but just a different company, while I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I looked at spaces for the smoothie shop. And I came across this great turnkey place that had a basement that had no purpose. It was just a big basement. I thought, wouldn't it be cool? I just bought a VR headset. I thought, wouldn't it be cool to have a VR space? And then my mind just sort of shifted into that. And I found the uniqueness of the idea very interesting, since there wasn't very many places in now 2017 that were open that did this thing, which made research very difficult, but that was what happened. And so lo and behold, I'm in a VR arcade business. So it was an interesting transition from retail to non-retail to retail to, I don't know, it was a bunch of weird stuff.
So if you're not much of a gamer, what was the reason for getting your first VR headset?
At the time, I think, well, actually, so when I left the company that closed, that was being bought, I got a decent severance package, and I wanted to purchase a new media system, just, streaming movies and things like that, not necessary for VR. And I happened to pick something up that was VR ready. Yeah. And then I thought, well, I have this extra play money. Why not just get a VR headset? And so I got that. And man, that went, if you've ever seen people put on VR for the first time, I know you guys have, but when you see that, it's just this amazing experience that people have when they put it on and they're like, what? That was what I had. Now, at that point, I still wasn't thinking VR arcade. It just happened to be because it was something I was kind of playing with. And again, not being much of a gamer, I have a PS4, and that's the most current thing I'll probably have for who knows how many years. I play occasionally, but so I put on the headset, I play a couple things, nothing major. I think my biggest game was wow, I can't think, Arizona Sunshine. Well, I don't know why I drew a blank on that. But that was like the biggest game I had. I enjoyed that. So when I had been thinking about that VR arcade or whatever was in my head at that point, I thought it was just a unique idea to share this life-altering experience. And so that's kind of where my mind was. It really wasn't about gaming per se. It was about the experience of VR, which I still think is is relevant now. It's all about experiencing VR and not about just a bunch of people playing a bunch of games. So, yeah.
And tell us about your setup at your location. Do you just have VR equipment? Do you also offer any other stuff?
Yeah, we're straight VR. I never got into anything else. I just never had the funds or the means or the opportunity to try to add anything else. And our VR is strictly room scale, 10 headsets. We could probably add a couple more. I just moved to this new location in September of last year. So we had more growth opportunities in the last location, but money was getting tight, as probably is the same case across a lot of arcades. So I needed to sort of downsize, at least in square footage. But it's all room scale. I have thought about the idea of doing free roam, but, and I know people will disagree on this, but I find that at least with my spaces, would limit my income if I were actually having a big, bunch of people booking, which isn't necessarily the case. But even then, I think it would still limit me. So if I had, a one arena area, then I could only have one group in there of any number of 4 to whatever. Whereas with my 10 headsets, I have the opportunity to have 10 people in there at a time, regardless of day, date, time, or whatever, things like that. So yeah, 10 headsets. Right now we're using the Quest 2 streaming. I don't see a reason right now to change. We're using the Index, but I want to go that wireless route. And once we figured out the whole networking issues that we kept running into, things have been running pretty smoothly since.
And
yeah,
you have your own podcast. Where did the idea from that come? How did it come about?
So yeah, I had I'd been working for Synthesis VR shortly after I opened my arcade, about a year after Synthesis approached me to work for them. So I've been working for them I just stopped last year, so whatever that is, 5 years or something. During the time working with them, one of my duties was to onboard arcades. So to hop on a call similar to this, go through the process of installing the software. And during that whole time, I'd have conversations with these people, learning random information from each arcade about their history, how they got into it. It was just sort of, I guess, a lubricant for me to kind of start getting the install done. But I really enjoyed that. And at some point during that process, I thought it'd be really cool to have these conversations with these arcade owners and see what their background is, see how they got into it. Similar to me, it could be such a variety of different things. It isn't just gamers, or may not be, non-business owners or whatever. And so I thought that'd be cool. And in about the last year with Synthesis, we did a couple of those, a couple of the conversation. But it was more towards building up the brand to a certain extent. Like I talked to a few arcades, but the goal was, of course, to chat about Synthesis and have that could be part of the conversation. And so once I left Synthesis, I thought I wanted to sort of revitalize that and just do it as a general conversation with arcade owners or arcade community members. I mean, I'm hoping to have other people other than arcade owners as part of that. But I think peers are what people would be more likely to listen to, at least initially. And then supporting characters, for lack of a better term, supporting characters would be part of that mix as well, because they're there. The goal is people that support the community as well as are part of the community. So I've always had this idea, and always meaning, since I started talking to arcade owners, to have this conversation again, not to overuse the word, but that conversation of what's going on, how they get to where they are and where they plan on going, and what they're doing.
Yeah. Are you also talking about the game library of other VR arcades with your guests, for example? And if you do, is there a trend that you notice that some kind of games tend to be more popular than others?
We don't necessarily focus. I mean, again, it depends on the tangent that we might end up on, but we don't necessarily focus on any particular, like, well, I'm not trying to figure out what games they're playing, things like that. But I do ask what their popular stuff is, and it's always trending to be multiplayer games, regardless of whether it's free roam. Obviously, that would want to be multiplayer anyway. But even room scale, the goal is to do multiplayer. For example, when I talked to John Kerr, who did the simulators, his wasn't to have one person playing one race, but to have a group of people that are playing in multiplayer races. And it's the same for me. It's all about putting people into multiplayer because there's a dual purpose for that. Obviously, the more people are playing, the more chances of people coming back, meaning like you wouldn't have, I just had a group the other day, for example, where one of the people had been there since my early openings, and then she brought somebody else in who brought somebody else in, and they brought somebody else in, and then this whole group of mixed bringing people in came the other day, and it was just like, oh, you've been doing this for a while, and it's just that kind of thing. So that's one of the aspects of it. It's not just come in and play multiplayer games. It's because from a business side of it, I want more people to give me more reviews, leave me more tips, and then come back. Because that branch, think of it as a tree and there's branches. And so you want more branches out there. So that tends to be the case. There are a few that have talked about, single player things, but they're generally like, for example, I one of the popular ones during parties is Job Simulator, just with the kids.
Yes.
And so, but that's already, I've got a party going on and they're playing a game that they enjoy. And so they're going to bring, do their party and then play that same game or whatever. So in that case, multiplayer isn't as much of a critical thing, but it's when you're not doing parties that you want to try to get more people in doing more things together. I want this to be I've always wanted it to be a social thing. Coming in, I like the open layouts. I don't like booths. When I was opening, I saw too many booth style things. I want to be an open area. But that multiplayer thing enriches that experience. You're playing together in a big open space. That is what I think is the key thing, is that everybody should be focusing on the multiplayer aspects. And the more you can do, the more you're able to do. So I can do 10-player games. Most of the big ones are the 8-player, but there is a few that can do 10. So the more you can do, the more you're capable of doing, I think the better it is. And I think that that's what people are finding. Again, with not just the roam scale, but the free roam as well. But that's, free roam with more players is good because, again, the same concept applies. It's just with free roam, that's the typical unit. You're not going to do a single player free roam. That will be a waste of money.
Sure, yeah. What is other maybe common things that you could take away from your guests, be it, hardware-wise, that you see a trend in what kind of hardware is used, or maybe the platforms?
Yeah, I don't know that anybody, my clients, if they're going to be hardware minded, are generally Quest 2 minded. And remember, I'm running Quest 2's streaming, so I'm using the hardware that they're using. Now, that said, there are people that come in and they have no idea, or not that they shouldn't say they have no idea. They come in and they don't realize that I'm using Quest. They see them hanging on the wall. They see the headsets, but because I have like faces on them and I have a different strap, they don't think it's the Quest. And then I have different handles, the padded handles on the controllers. So it's a different experience. And then I have them come in and put on the headsets, and then they realize, oh, this is a Quest, okay. But then they have to they kind of understand that it's a streaming, so it's not just in the headset. And then you add in this idea of the multiplayer, and now they're thinking of having everybody with the headsets. So trend-wise, like what people have generally are Quests, if they're going to have anything. I haven't heard anybody having Quest 3s yet, like of my clients anyway. Generally Quest 2s, very few, if any, have ever had an original Quest. So on very rare occasions, like my questions when customers come in is always, have you done VR before? And so I gauge, all right, do they have a Quest? What's your favorite game? Did they try Friends Quest or things like that? So I get a sense of who owns what headsets. And on very rare occasions, I own an Oculus. The Rift, or I own I've never had anybody come out with an Index. Actually, I should say never. At some points, I've had people with Indexes, but it's rare. Maybe had an original Vive or whatever. Usually, it's the Oculus Rift because that was more of a consumer marketed thing versus the Vive, which was a little difficult to find and get if you didn't already know about it. And the Index, same thing. Unless you're Insta Steam, you're probably not going to have an Index. So, but yeah, so I think that hardware wise, people to a certain extent, don't care. They just care about the experience. So I had somebody that posted a review, and they're like, I think the words were modern equipment. And I'm like, this is a 3-year-old headset. And the computers, who knows how old the computers are. But people say it's modern equipment because they don't necessarily know any better. Even if they've used a Quest, they don't know any better. I think people get so hung up on this notion that you have to have this high-end, super powerful headset because that makes you unique, which it isn't. I mean, think of arcades. Actually, this is a bad example, but those free play arcades that have the pinball machines, they're not selling you on high-end pinball machines. They want you there, of course, to drink. But it's the same concept. You go there to play the pinballs. You drink as consequentially, which is great for those kind of places. That's the thing I wish I had gotten into, is something similar to that. But people get hung up on this. You have to have a high-end device to be able to do stuff. Another sort of related kind of concept is you don't go to a restaurant to have them use high-end Vitamix blenders to blend up a smoothie for you. You don't know what the heck they're using. They're using whatever they use. Some things might be better suited for that kind of environment, just with wear and tear. And that's kind of the case with the Quest. Wear and tear eventually will make a Quest need to be replaced, but that doesn't, the customer's perspective, that doesn't affect that. So I think that's important. People have to kind of get out of their head. And again, gamers. That's why I'm not a gamer. So I think of these things not as a gamer would, but as somebody that's like, how would the customer experience it? How would they feel about being in this environment? And so far, I've yet to find a review that said, man, these guys are using old Quest 2s and rickety rigs or whatever. I mean, it's just all about the experience. And I think that went way off base for the original question, but that's where it went.
No, I was just thinking, like, I speak to a lot of arcades, and one or two have the Quest 3. That is it, to be honest, from everyone I talk to.
I mean, I'm sure it's a better headset. I don't see why it wouldn't be, but I'd rather spend 150 less and get another Quest 2 if I had to.
Yeah.
Now, that said, if I could, I would probably get the Focus 3. If I could afford it, I'd have 10 Focus 3s. Yeah. I did test it out originally, and the primary reason I actually went with the Quest was the accessories. That was it. I could accessorize the Quest, whereas I couldn't with the Focus 3. And then once we put the faces on there, it's hard to go back to any other headset where you can't put stickers of faces on the front of the headset. So now I'm like, which is a weird thing to go and think, oh, if I went back to this headset, like the occasional time we'd go back to the Index when we were running tests was like, oh, there's nothing that's so plain on the front. There's just a fan on there. Yeah. We had a printed like our logo or something or URL, and it's like, it's so plain. So that's another reason I like it. And looking at the Quest 3, I'm like, oh, where am I going to put a face on there? So if I can, I'll buy used Quest 2s as long as I can. So that's the same actually idea that I had with the original Vive, which if I could still use the Vive and maybe wireless, being hit or miss, whatever. If I could still use the Vive, I would still use the Vive because the customer has no idea. They're just in VR. Yeah. I would use it with the Quest controllers. I'm sorry, not the Quest controllers, the Index controllers. Yeah. But otherwise, I would still be running. If I could do a Vive and not worry about cables, I would still run them. I just can't because of the open space, which is one disadvantage of that. So
yeah, see, there's not much room for playing around.
You'd have to use like the cameras in some sort of smile or something. I don't know. If when you show my pictures of my arcade, you'll see the faces that I have and how so nice they look on there. How funny people see the faces and they laugh because they're looking at their friends who's the first person to go in, and they don't know that they have a face on there. They're just putting on and they're like, oh, that's funny. So I'm using those kind of things as much as I can, having less volume than I used to, but using whatever I can to make people smile.
Yeah. I wonder, I think you have really specific reason to, starting out your own arcade, but would you recommend anyone else who is like looking into it right now? Would you recommend also starting up a VR arcade?
So that's a tough question. I mean, I see a lot of people that come in and they're looking to do this kind of thing. But again, I think the problem is that they look at it as a way to sort of make money. I don't know how to make it. I don't know what else to call it, but they see it as a cheap way to make money in a business. Because it only costs $300 for the headset. They don't think about licensing. They don't think about space. They don't think about insurance. They don't think about marketing. They're not thinking of that. They're thinking, again, the same idea I had, although I had a little bit of some of the buildup before, like the marketing, and I understood the cost of doing business. It's this idea that, if I build it, they will come. It's a lot of work. And so I think anybody going into any business, but specifically this, has to first of all look and see what their area is. Now, I'm in an area that, of course, at the time had no VR cases. Again, 2017, where there was very few in the world, much less the country. And so, so going into it, I knew I was going to be unique, which can be a good thing and a bad thing. Because if you're in an area that is missing entertainment, that could be good that you're introducing entertainment. But it could also be bad because why is there no other entertainment? Yeah. Maybe there is no customers. So in my area at the time, and still kind of now, there isn't really another VR arcade. There's a couple, actually one really small place, and then some like not arena, but like trampoline parks or something that have it in there. But there's a lot of escape rooms. So we're saturated, or probably not even yet saturated, with escape rooms. So people are coming to the area for escapes, to do entertainment type things. So I'm sort of in that border. There's no other VR arcades really. And so, okay, there's a reason for that, because maybe people don't want that. But I'm also in an area that has a lot of entertainment type of venues that are location-based entertainment like escape rooms. And so people kind of look for that. And so, okay, I'm kind of in that midway point. So that's one thing people don't usually look at. They don't look at, I'm going to be the only one. So, is that good or bad? You have to understand that kind of stuff. So it's really hard to say whether I would recommend it or not. I would only recommend it if you are able to sustain not just the business, but yourself for some number of years. And I have a second business that is now sustaining me versus the arcade. But that it's taken me a year to get where I am right now, but it's a lot of work. And I had to sustain myself another way to be able to do that, but also sustain that business and this business to do it. And so if you can sustain yourself for, let's say, 6 months to a year, and you're able to invest the money into marketing and building your brand, and forget the actual equipment. I mean, that's a lump sum of money you have to spend. Forget the actual equipment. Focus on the building of the business. If you can do that, then I think that's the way to do it. If you're more focused, and this is what I see, which headset should I get? Which management company, which software should I get? Which game was going to be licensable? If you're thinking about that sort of thing and you haven't thought about the business, you're going to fail. So don't do it. Just find something else that, get a job. I don't know. But if it's something that you haven't spent the time to think about the business, and you're spending more time on the equipment or, the software, that's a bad thing. If you've spent a lot of time on the business and the equipment is sort of incidental, then I think you'll have success. I think that's the direction you want to go in, and not just simply, it's so cool. That was really bad, but yeah, VR kids are cool, man. That's the thing. So yeah, that's that. I think that answers that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, like you said, they experience VR for the first time and they're just blown away and think, this would be a great business idea.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember years ago, I had somebody come in, maybe like they were 30 minutes away or something like that. That's where they lived. And they came in to try it out and started talking about their arcade where they wanted to, mobile arcades. And I was like, great. We can try to work together. This is now almost 6 years or more. And they just did it because they thought it was such a cool idea. Now they never took off. I mean, I think they had the business briefly. They may have even been part of the community group briefly, and then they just disappeared. And I keep an eye on things like that because I'm curious who my competition is or who's local to me. But they disappeared. Now on the flip side, I have another person that is probably the closest to competition that I have. He has a couple, I think he's now up to 3 or maybe 4 headsets, but he also has a soda shop. So he's selling drinks and things like that, non-alcoholic. So he has that advantage where people can stay there and do more. But he came into it as I haven't talked to him, but just sneaky. He comes into it as somebody that has developed VR stuff and understands the VR side of things and opened a business that didn't just rely on VR. And so he was thinking about that kind of thing, very obviously, where I was willy-nilly myself into it. But yeah, that's important to really consider that aspect of it. So.
Yeah. And we briefly touched on the topic of the area. Do you think if VRCade is located, let's say in a mall or in the city outskirts, downtown, do you think it will make a difference? Is that important? Or
yeah, so I would have had a different answer 6 months ago, I think, maybe. So when I first opened, when I was first searching for a space, and because I was dumb and thought if I built it they will come, I didn't care where I was. As a matter of fact, I looked at a couple places where they were inside of big brick mill buildings, if you're familiar with those are like, with the tall ceilings. Yeah. Oh yeah, this is a big space, or this is enough of a space and I can be there. And fortunately, the one place I almost signed with, they said no because they were getting what they at that point said was the same business, and I was like, what? But it turned out to be just one like a console game place. And that worked out because then I don't remember if somebody reached out to me or if I found it, but it was in a very busy area in downtown of my city in Providence. And it wasn't the best space, but it was in a good spot. And if I think if I hadn't opened there, I would not have built up the clients that I had because I was now walk-by traffic. Eventually that grew when it came to bookings. So after 2 years there, I outgrew that space and had to move to a different location. And my mind was still on this idea that I wanted to be a walk-by business, or there's just for clarity, when people say walk-in versus walk-by, I get walk-ins. I got walk-ins when I moved, but I didn't get but there's certain places that have walk-by, like a mall is a walk-by kind of a thing. So I never was in a mall. So when we moved, my concern was, or when we were considering moving, my concern was, I'm going to end up in a place where people don't normally walk by. It's a very busy main road. It's not like people are walking. And so I was concerned about that. But in looking at my sort of numbers, and I wasn't really tracking it overly well, but I was getting a lot more bookings than I was walk-ins. And so taking the chance, my sales dropped a bit because I no longer had the walk-by traffic, but it started to build up. And so in that case, at my second location, it didn't matter where I was. I mean, it was a main area, it was a nice area, but it didn't necessarily matter. People would come to me because I was a location-based business or location-based entertainment. I wasn't a mall location. I don't know how to make that difference clear. So that was great. Now I'm at the end of last year, middle of last year, I was not making as much money and I needed to reduce rent and utilities. And so looked at a different space. And now my mind was bookings are important, or bookings are the main thing of my clients. I moved and it was a drastic drop. And the reason, I think, I don't know for sure, is the area that I'm in now isn't the Pawtucket is the name of the city. Isn't Pawtucket is thought of in the area as the best area. I mean, the neighborhood I'm in is decent, but it's just people think of that town in the state rather, and it's Pawtucket. And I've had at least one person say to me, "Oh, I don't know if I want to go there." And it's like, we're right off the highway. It's a nice building. But so I think I had a bit of a drop because of location. So it's a weird double-edged sword because in my mind, you don't need to be in a main area. You don't need to be in, downtown, capital city or whatever. You don't necessarily need to be in the mall, but that's a different clientele that I never experienced. And I know arcade owners that do thrive in that kind of environment. That's what they do. But it does matter if from my current experience, that people want to be there. I also have another problem with the area because we don't have signs up, so people can't find us, which would have been a whole different problem if I had opened in, brand new in that. But people, at least I have customers that are returning. It's just not like if I stayed where I was. Now, if I stayed where I was, I'd be losing more money than where I am now. But the move was a necessity. It's just that so it's a hard question to answer. I don't think it's 100% necessary where you need to be. In a mall, you're relying on short. Again, this is just from my outside perspective. You need short, quick experiences, short, more expensive experiences, or if you're booking longer time, you're selling more of a big deal. You're not necessarily always a booking only kind of a thing. When you're outside of a mall or outside of an area where there's walk-by traffic, like if you're in a strip mall or you're in a, like one of those, like in my case, Newport would be a place where people are walking a lot. And so they go by and it's not really a mall. If you're in those areas, that's different. But if you're in an area where you are selling more like birthday parties and bookings only and groups are coming, then I think that the location doesn't matter. I will tell you one other thing that I think is the key as well in location. And I think this is also the problem where I am. May not just be it's Pawtucket. There's not a lot to do in that area. Mm-hmm. So at least in my previous location, and of course in Providence, there was a bar downstairs. We were down a strip of different shops and things like that. With you drive 5 minutes and you're in another restaurant, and around the corner is another restaurant. In the current location I'm in, downtown Pawtucket isn't that close, but it's also not really that happening. And so I think that's another thing that I can't offer a whole experience, just the VR experience. So if you're thinking about a location and you're not thinking mall, which is already built in to have those kind of things, think of what else is in the area that may draw people in or keep people there, or that people may make a night of it. And so I think I'm missing out on that. I can't help it. I am where I am, but that's something I hadn't fully thought of when I was desperate to, reduce my rent. So money talks sometimes.
Yes. Yeah. So because I speak to a lot of arcades, and I've seen arcades that have changed location from like malls and things like that, and like they had to close because they weren't getting the walk-ins. And I've worked in sales for a really long time. And one of the biggest things is you can't rely on walk-ins. Like you can't rely on business to come to you. So it's Are you referring to like walk-ins, like walk-bys, like a mall? That's people that are just going walking past, and they just come in to check it out. So it's very hard. It's
different. Yeah, and like I said, I had to think about that when I went from Providence to Johnston. My mind was, and the funny thing was, the nice thing about Rhode Island, it's very compact. There's a lot compressed in there. And as an example, in where I was in Providence, there was like at least 3 to 4 colleges right around me. But college students were not my clients. People wonder that, about this kind of, well, you're near all the colleges. They weren't. I mean, I might have had like maybe 5% maybe. And so that was one thought. If I move, I'll lose those college students, but they're not my customers. But I had to look at it and say, all right, where are my customers coming from? Are they the walk-by customers, or are they prevalently the bookings, advanced bookings? And although at the new location and even in this one, I get walk-ins, people come in randomly and say, oh, hey, I wanted to try this out. I mean, I have my schedule is a little weird, but I can touch on that if you want. But if whenever we'd have walk-ins, people would walk in. Mm-hmm. But primarily, the move was, I guess, to test. I mean, a weird way to test it. The bookings only, because the bookings only, that was where most of my customers come from, and they do that now. It's mostly bookings only. So if I'm going from an environment where I'm relying on walk-by traffic, moving to a place like you said, if I move to a place where it's relying on bookings, well, I have to do it's a whole new business.
Yeah.
It's not, maybe I'll have some carryover. I mean, I lost customers that were even the ones that booked where I was because they were locals. And so they didn't want to travel. Now, funny thing is I've had a couple come and do birthday parties like years later after I moved, and they're like, oh, now we want to do a birthday party for our 6-year-old, which is, by the way, a whole nother surreal thing of experiencing kids that are 9, now 16, come into your arcade. That's like something I did not anticipate being like, wow. But yeah, that's the thing. It's a different, you have to, again, consider who you want your customers to be, or who you think your customers are going to be, and play that into your business. So,
and what do you think has made you kind of have all these bookings? Like, what are you doing to keep people coming?
Obviously me.
Yeah, of course.
There is, I mean, again, it comes down to that experience.
Right.
I have some would say not enough reviews, but I have a lot of great reviews, and a lot of the reviews aren't. When I had employees, it wasn't. I don't want to be like, oh, I'm so awesome, because a lot of the reviews said, oh, the owner was great, or Nidal was great, or whatever. That's I get a lot of reviews. But when the employees were doing it, oh, B was great, Luis was great, Austin was great. I mean, they're part of that. I mean, we when we're asking for reviews, we give them our name so they can do that. But it's the experience that they always talk about. Again, there's that rare one that's like, oh, they have top of the line equipment. But when people are having the experience, they're writing about the experience. Their review is not about, the Quest 2s, which are the top of the great Quest 2 chain. I mean, I don't know what, they're not writing about the equipment. And a lot of times they're not even writing specifically about the game. They're writing about the experience. And so if you can give them an experience that they can share about, that will get people in to book. And part of the sharing, of course, is reviews, which is the modern word of mouth sort of thing. And so by having those kind of reviews and having those people that tell about the friend told me about it, that's why I booked sort of thing. That's kind of where it comes from. Now, for me, I'm not that great at marketing. That's my weakness. If I had a few grand to just sort of blow on marketing, I probably would do better. But I'm very stingy about that because I never know what works. I don't know where to put my money in. I don't have a lot of money to spend. So I'm very not that good at it. I have like Facebook ads and Google ads, but that's like really small amounts. I keep trying to do social media, but again, it's sort of a work in progress, and having two businesses, it's kind of hard to really focus on doing all that with two of them. So I don't know that that's it, but the other thing is I also have like a connection with the local like things to do in my area kind of website, so that people find me through things to do and they see that's an interesting. So I get a lot of bookings that way. I don't know if a percentage of that, but I do get a lot of Google searches, and that's how I found you, which could be either VR, which is more than it used to be, or it could just be date nights in Rhode Island, and I come up because that's where the keywords happen to be in, or that's where the reel or something that I posted had mentioned. So
yeah, and like you said, there's not much going on there, so it's quite a unique experience as well, isn't it? So
yeah, it can be. I mean, again, they're going to get. We just had something called Level 99. If you ever, I think it's called Bodeborg, but it's basically it's a bunch of rooms, and you do usually physical activities, but sometimes puzzles, and sometimes brainy type things. And so it's like a bunch of mini escape rooms all in one big area. That's the biggest thing that's opened in my area, and that would be the most directly impacting my business if people are looking for things to do. Other than that, it's the movies or an escape room. And I've been pushing the escape rooms. I just reduced the price of my escape rooms and had an uptick, which I hadn't had in a long time. Had an uptick in escape room bookings, because now I'm cheaper than everybody else, which now whether that's good or bad, I don't know, but I'm getting more people. so it's so yeah, there isn't a ton of things to do, but they're all relatively similar, and I kind of fit in that niche of things.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing that the big one is this level 99 place, the Bodebork type business. That is the only one that concerns me because their pricing is definitely a lot more competitive than mine for what they do. But they've got more volume than I do, so they can easily swallow that, which I can't. Like I thought I've reduced my prices last year. I evened them out, making them sort of a little bit lower than most of my pricing, but a little bit actually probably I had price breaks at 3 and 6, and I just set it at the 6-player price break because I thought it was just easier. I had a slight uptick that way with bookings, but I made everything the same price, and now we just changed it with escape rooms. But I can't go any cheaper. Like any cheaper, and my licensing would start eating really into my costs. Although now I'm not paying electricity, so electricity isn't eating into my cost. But still, like it's just only so cheap that I can go.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask you something about the events for VR operators. You mentioned the IAPA earlier.
Yeah.
And are there any events that you would recommend that you have visited yourself and that you think, I learned a lot of stuff there?
IAPA was the only thing I've been to, and that was as a presenter, or not presenter, but I had a booth there with Synthesis, and so I covered those days. That happened to also be the week I got COVID, which I didn't know I had. Sorry if I gave it to anybody, I don't know. But I was like, that was a terrible week to get it because I'm like the only one there the whole time. So I didn't really get to explore. I wish I had, but my thing is I've never really had the time or inclination or money to be able to just visit these kind of things. Like I'd have to close up 2 businesses at this point to go to these types of shows. So I don't necessarily think about this. I think IAPA was excellent. I met people there that, again, this whole idea of, being behind a keyboard, I don't necessarily know these people, but once meeting them in real life or in this method is excellent. So that was one advantage that way. So I don't know anything beyond IAPA. I know that there's some kind of summit happening, but again, I can't afford to fly out and spend time there. I'm not saying nobody should do this, but I feel like all I'm going to do is go there and see the latest technology, which I don't need. Again, it's not, to me, latest technology doesn't really appeal to me because I've got the business that I've got. Now, maybe if I had a ton of money, I could spend on equipment, and I probably would, but it's not a necessity for my business. So that's why I think of those kind of things. This other VR one that could be more informative, maybe focused on VR and may have, interesting speakers. Again, that might be the only thing I might recommend. I just don't know enough about it or the people going that could really give you any feedback on that.
Yeah. Would you get an Apple Vision Pro? Let's say you can afford it. Are you still interested in the newer tech, or it doesn't?
Yeah. So the Apple Vision Pro isn't really an arcade. It's not. Sure. They don't push it as a VR headset anyway. But it's but obviously, if there was better tech that would enhance the experience, I would certainly do that. So the sort of example is the idea of going wireless. I know wireless has been around long before the Quest, and I know I think it's Nofrio that had the VR, the wireless module for the Index. That I don't know what's going on with that. I had thought about it. I think it would have had a problem. With the channels, which I have with the Quest. But my thing was, I would want the reason I went to the Quest was to become wireless, which was for me a whole different experience. Every time I'd go back to the Index, which was a much better headset, because I had to, every time the cable would be the issue. I couldn't do the cable anymore, unwinding people. The issue I had with Quest was just the lag that we eventually solved, and moving, I think, solved it even more. But that was, to me, a technological leap, even though the headset was not a step forward, even though the PCs hadn't changed, even though maybe not the latency per se, but the visuals are a little bit lower quality because of the streaming that I have to limit it to. So if the technology somehow advances the experience, and maybe high resolution might, but nobody's complained about the resolution.
Yeah.
I think that would definitely move forward. I mean, I shouldn't say definitely. If I had the money, yes, I would do it. I mean, if I had the money, I would go, like I said, Focus 3 and do some sort of free roam in a small space in my current arcade. Not take over it, but that would make it an advantage over somebody else doing it. So,
what are your plans for the future?
Retire. So I don't know. It's difficult because of how business has gone.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, after I moved, so the problem was when I was looking at moving, the problem was either I had to move or I had to close. And I didn't want to close. I mean, I kept looking at like all these gift vouchers that people had, and the people that are like, "Oh, I'm going to bring little Susie to her birthday party." I kept looking at those things. I didn't want to close. So the move was a necessity to continue the business. Do a zoning issue, and meanwhile I'm like worried about getting closed because I'm kind of under the radar. But as I'm doing this stuff and as business isn't really booming, I am finding that I probably am going to be closing. And last year, as part of this, not in the plans of closing, but as part of taking my salary out of the business, was I started the other business, or ramped up the other business, which happens to be a photography business, and so that I could get that to the point where it's paying my salary, which last month it did completely without any problems at all. Like that was, the first month where it's in that. The past few months, it's been like sometimes comes from here, sometimes comes from there. But the business itself, the arcade, isn't necessarily like it's holding its own because there's nobody to pay and there's no electricity anymore. It's just the rent and some, incidentals. If I could maintain that, I will continue to run it as long as I can. If it can make money, that'd be great because then I can bring on staff to cover the shifts where I would be nice to do the photography instead. So right now, just maintaining business, keeping the business going, because I really enjoy the reaction from people, and I really like the idea of people coming back and being entertained by me and the business. I'm an entertainer at the business. So I want to continue that notion. If you had asked me 5 years ago, my goal was to have multiple locations. Then COVID hit. Then I made money where right after COVID, that was like, yes, I'm ready to open a second location and bring on staff. And then business died. Things started getting expensive. So the future is tentative. It's really going to depend on how this business does, as well as how the photography does, in that if the photography is the predominant business that grows for me and I'm able to maintain the arcade, that will be the case. The arcade would be quote unquote maintained. That's the simplest thing. That's the least I can hope for. What will be great is if it gets to the point where I can at least hire staff and it just runs itself, and then maybe I can sell it, which is still difficult because I don't know that it's showing a huge profit, if a profit at all. So, not a bleak future, but not like, flowery. Again, the cautionary tale. So,
yeah, I think we lost you for a second there.
I'm still here.
Yeah, there you go. I was going to ask you about your podcast and when the next episode is. How often do you do your podcast?
Yeah. So the next episode is hopefully coming out this weekend. And seeing as how it's roughly every month, that's about what I'm doing. I'd like to, my goal was hopefully to do it twice a month, or at minimum once a month, but more often is good. Again, the issue from my thing is time. My side is time. So versus scheduling the interview, doing it through that process, and then editing it takes time itself. But beyond that, just the getting the interviews, and scheduling that is again a bit of a juggle. So if it weren't for, again, not that I'm trying to dismiss the arcade part of my life, but if it weren't for the arcade part of my life, I'd be able to devote more time to doing this sort of stuff. For me, video and photo, that's kind of where I'd like to focus more of. The arcade just makes a little bit extra money, which is nice. So that kind of slows me down. But ideally, twice a month, minimum once a month. So we're going to see one this month. We saw one last month. So yay. I think we saw one last month. Actually, I don't remember now. I think there was one in February.
And you are an admin of VR group on Facebook as well, right?
The VRCade owners group. Yep. I've been an admin for about a year now, maybe. And I was moderating for a few years before that. So that was an offshoot of the VRCade community group, trying to focus on getting more focused on owners. And when Wade started that, I was one of the first few that joined. And then at some point, I'm not sure how circumstances happened, I became moderator. And then since Wade doesn't really do a lot of participation in the group or anything much in the group, I'm not sure how much interest he has in the VR community right now. But I asked him just to become an admin. I'm also moderator of the VR community group as well. So that I know there's a couple other admins there, but I'm happy just being a moderator for that group. Although I want more dominant control of everything. So, we're just plugging myself on that one.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming on, Nidal. It's been very interesting hearing your thoughts on the arcade industry and how you got started. I'm really glad that you came on. So thank you very much.
Thank you guys for having me. Yeah, I appreciate being brought on board. Maybe we'll have you guys on my podcast, my whatever it's called, the conversation at some point soon. Then we can I can hear your side of the story.
Definitely. Let's just set it up. Yeah, 100%. And
excellent.
If you're watching it and you are a VR arcade owner and you wanted to come on our show, or if you want to get on the conversation as well, just reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to have you on. Thank you, Chan, Indeed. As well, for being a beautiful co-host.
Thank you, guys. Thank you also, Nidal, for your insight, and it was really interesting to hear your side of the story.
Thank you, Jan. It was nice meeting you.
And if you're ever in Rhode Island,
Pawtucket.
You're in
Rhode Island. That's all I have to say. It's in Rhode Island.
In Rhode Island,
it's the same size as Boston, practically. So we may as well just say Rhode Island.
Then drop in and pay Nidal a visit. We will catch you in the next episode in 2 weeks' time. Thank you all for watching. Thank you again, Nidal and Chan. It has been great.
Thanks, guys.
Take care. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.